Imagine walking into your local hardware store to buy supplies for a construction project. The shelves are half empty. A nearby factory is waiting for critical machine parts that never arrived. A furniture retailer can't deliver customers' orders. Manufacturers across America are asking the same question: where's our freight? Then you discover something almost impossible to believe. One company, responsible for moving millions of kilograms of freight across the United States, had suddenly stopped operating. Nearly 100 years of history, more than 30,000 employees, hundreds of freight terminals, thousands of daily routes, millions of shipment decisions. Every hour, freight flowed through a giant network designed to keep American businesses moving. But hidden beneath that enormous operation, a different system was quietly breaking apart. A system burdened by decades of acquisitions, mounting debt, aging infrastructure, labor disputes, and operational complexity that became harder to control with every passing year. When the network finally reached its limit, it didn't just affect one company. It disrupted customers across the country, triggered one of the largest trucking bankruptcies in American history, and forced an entire industry to absorb the collapse of a carrier that had once been considered too important to fail. So how does a company that survived wars, recessions, oil crises, deregulation, and nearly a century of change collapse in just a matter of days? To answer that, we first need to understand the hidden logistics machine that kept America's freight moving. Before we can understand why Yellow collapsed, we need to understand what the company actually did. Because despite employing tens of thousands of people, most Americans had never heard of it. That's because Yellow wasn't delivering packages to your front door. Its customers were businesses. Every single day, factories, retailers, hospitals, construction companies, food distributors, and manufacturers depended on Yellow to move freight between cities. This business model is called Less-Than-Truckload, or LTL. Instead of one customer paying for an entire truck, dozens of different businesses share the same trailer. Imagine 10 companies, each shipping just a few pallets. Sending 10 separate trucks would be incredibly expensive. Instead, Yellow collected freight from every customer, brought it to a local terminal, sorted thousands of shipments, combined freight heading in the same direction, loaded it onto long-distance trailers, then repeated the entire process again at another terminal closer to the final destination. Only after passing through this nationwide network would a local truck complete the final delivery. It sounds simple. In reality, it was one of the most complicated logistics systems in America. Every pallet had to reach the correct trailer. Every trailer had to leave on schedule. Every terminal depended on trucks arriving from dozens of other cities. If one major terminal fell behind, the delay could spread across the network within hours. Imagine an airport where every flight carries passengers for connecting flights. If one airport shuts down, the disruption spreads far beyond that city. Yellow's freight network worked the same way. Its terminals weren't just warehouses. They were the beating heart of the entire business. For nearly a century, that system kept American commerce moving. But hidden inside that enormous network was a problem that had been growing for decades. And it all began with one decision to grow much faster than the company could integrate.
For decades, Yellow became one of America's largest freight companies because its network kept growing. More customers, more terminals, more trucks, more drivers, more freight. On paper, growth looked simple. In reality, every new terminal became another moving piece inside an already enormous machine. Imagine trying to coordinate hundreds of airports. Every departure has to leave on time. Every connection has to work. Every delay spreads somewhere else. Yellow faced the same challenge. Every evening, thousands of local trucks collected freight from businesses across America. That freight arrived at regional terminals within a narrow time window. Workers had only a few hours to unload every trailer, scan every shipment, sort thousands of pallets, and reload them onto the correct long-distance trucks and send them back onto the road before dawn. There was almost no room for mistakes. A trailer leaving 30 minutes late could delay dozens of deliveries the following day. A sorting mistake in one terminal could send freight hundreds of kilometers in the wrong direction. A mechanical breakdown, bad weather, or a shortage of dock workers didn't just affect one location. It placed additional pressure on every terminal waiting for those shipments. The larger Yellow became, the more difficult it became to keep every part of the network perfectly synchronized. Success wasn't measured by how many trucks the company owned. It depended on how efficiently every truck, every trailer, every terminal, every dock, every dispatcher, and every driver worked together. That required extraordinary coordination, because unlike a traditional warehouse, Yellow's freight wasn't supposed to stay there. The terminal was only a transfer point. Freight arrived, changed trailers, and immediately continued its journey. The longer freight remained inside a terminal, the more money the company lost. Speed wasn't just important, it was the entire business model. And while Yellow was becoming remarkably good at building this nationwide network, management believed there was a faster way to become even bigger. Instead of building new operations one city at a time, they decided to buy companies that already had them. That decision would permanently change the future of Yellow Corporation.
By the late 1990s, Yellow had become one of the largest freight carriers in America. But management wanted something bigger. Instead of expanding one terminal at a time, they decided to buy entire freight networks. In 2003, Yellow acquired Roadway Corporation. It wasn't simply buying more trucks, it was buying another nationwide logistics system, another fleet, another terminal network, another workforce, another dispatch operation, another company that had spent decades developing its own way of moving freight. Just 2 years later, Yellow acquired USF Corporation. That added several regional carriers, including Holland, New Penn, and Reddaway. On paper, the strategy looked brilliant. Instead of spending years building new terminals, Yellow instantly expanded its national footprint. More customers, more freight, more market share. Investors saw a company becoming an industry giant. But inside the business, a much harder challenge had just begun. Each company operated differently, different terminal layouts, different dispatch systems, different software, different operating procedures, different maintenance programs, different management teams, different workplace cultures. Even routes that looked identical on a map were often managed completely differently. Imagine buying 5 successful airlines, then expecting them to operate tomorrow morning as if they had always been one company. Pilots, maintenance, scheduling, technology, operations, everything would have to work together perfectly. Yellow faced the same challenge, except instead of passengers, it was coordinating millions of kilograms of freight every week. For years, the company continued operating several overlapping networks that had originally been designed to compete against one another. Instead of one perfectly integrated system, Yellow was managing multiple large systems under a single corporate name. The company had successfully become bigger, but it hadn't necessarily become simpler. And over time, that complexity became increasingly expensive. Management believed there was still one solution left. If every network could finally operate as one company, Yellow might still survive. That strategy became known as One Yellow. By the early 2020s, Yellow's biggest problem wasn't a lack of customers, it wasn't a lack of trucks, and it wasn't a lack of freight. It was the network itself. For years, the company had operated multiple overlapping freight systems that had originated from different acquisitions. Management believed those systems could no longer continue operating separately. The solution became a transformation plan called One Yellow. Its objective sounded simple. Instead of several overlapping freight networks, Yellow would operate one integrated nationwide system. Drivers would become more flexible. Trailers could be utilized more efficiently. Freight would move through fewer duplicate routes. Terminals would handle shipments more consistently. Equipment could be shared across the entire company instead of remaining tied to individual operating companies. If successful, the company expected to reduce costs, improve efficiency, increase asset utilization, and make the entire network more competitive. On paper, it looked exactly like the transformation Yellow needed. But transforming a nationwide logistics system isn't like installing new software. The network continued operating every single day. Thousands of trucks still had to leave terminals. Millions of kilograms of freight still had to reach customers. There was no pause button. Every operational change affected real deliveries, real businesses, real customers. Many of those changes also required modifications to long-standing work rules negotiated with the Teamsters Union. The company argued greater operational flexibility was essential if One Yellow was going to succeed. The union responded that workers had already made significant concessions over many years, while management repeatedly failed to deliver the promised turnaround. Both sides believed they were protecting the future of the company, but without agreement, large parts of the transformation couldn't move forward. Time became Yellow's greatest enemy. Every month the company delayed, costs continued accumulating, competitors continued improving, customers continued expecting faster, more reliable deliveries. The transformation had become a race, not just against competitors, but against the company's own financial condition. Yellow believed One Yellow would save the business. The question was, could the company survive long enough to finish rebuilding itself? By the summer of 2023, Yellow wasn't just running out of money, it was running out of time. The company needed to refinance more than $1.3 billion in debt that was due in 2024, including a large U.S. Treasury loan provided during the pandemic. Cash reserves were rapidly shrinking, while financial pressure continued to build. Then, something even more dangerous happened. Customers began losing confidence. For an ordinary business, losing customers is painful. For an LTL network, it can be catastrophic. Remember how the system worked. Every trailer depended on freight collected from dozens of different customers. When businesses started worrying that Yellow might stop operating, many redirected their shipments to competitors before anything had officially happened. Industry reporting at the time described freight volumes falling dramatically as customers sought to avoid the risk of cargo becoming stranded. At first, that sounded like good news for competitors, but for Yellow, it created a vicious cycle. Less freight meant trailers left terminals partially empty. Partially empty trailers meant higher transportation costs per shipment. Higher costs meant even greater financial pressure. As the network became less efficient, even more customers left. The logistics system that had taken decades to build was now weakening from the inside. Every departing customer made the remaining network less valuable. Every empty trailer increased the cost of moving the freight that was left. This wasn't a sudden collapse, it was a chain reaction. At the same time, the dispute surrounding the One Yellow transformation had reached a critical stage. The company argued that without operational changes, it could not survive. The Teamsters argued workers should not bear the cost of years of management decisions. Both sides continued defending what they believed was necessary. But the market wasn't waiting. Customers needed certainty, and certainty was exactly what Yellow could no longer provide. By late July 2023, freight pickups stopped at many locations. Terminals grew quieter. Trailers remained parked. Drivers waited for work that never came. Nearly a century of continuous freight movement was coming to an end. On July 30, 2023, Yellow ceased normal operations. 1 week later, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, marking the end of one of America's largest less-than-truckload carriers. But the bankruptcy filing wasn't the real ending. It was simply the official confirmation that the network had already stopped working.
When Yellow stopped operating, the trucks stopped moving. But the story didn't, because what remained was one of the largest corporate liquidations in American transportation history. Hundreds of freight terminals, thousands of tractors, tens of thousands of trailers, properties built over nearly a century, all had to be sold. Competitors quickly recognized what was happening. They weren't just buying real estate, they were buying strategic locations. Freight terminals near major cities take years to develop. Many were already connected to highways, industrial customers, rail links, and established freight corridors. Instead of building from scratch, rivals could purchase pieces of Yellow's network and expand much faster. The people suffered the most. More than 30,000 employees suddenly found themselves searching for work. Many quickly joined other trucking companies. Others left the industry altogether. Communities that had relied on Yellow terminals for decades watched those facilities change ownership or close completely. For customers, freight continued moving. Other carriers absorbed much of the volume. The American logistics system survived, not because Yellow was replaced overnight, but because competitors rapidly expanded to fill the gap left behind. Looking back, Yellow's collapse wasn't caused by a single bad decision. It wasn't one acquisition, one loan, one disagreement, or one difficult year. It was decades of complexity building faster than the company could simplify it. Every acquisition added capability, but it also added another layer of integration. Every new terminal increased reach, but it also increased coordination. Every effort to become larger made the operating system more difficult to manage. The company survived recessions, fuel crises, industry deregulation, and changing markets. What it couldn't overcome was the challenge of continuously rebuilding one of America's largest freight networks while keeping it running every single day. Yellow Corporation wasn't simply a trucking company. It was a living logistics system, And, like every complex system, its greatest strength was also its greatest vulnerability. When every part depends on every other part, small failures don't stay small, they spread. That is why Yellow's story matters. Because this isn't just the story of one company. It's a reminder that scale alone doesn't create resilience. Systems do. The companies that survive the longest aren't always the ones that grow the fastest. They're the ones that can still control the complexity they've created long after the growth has ended.